This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner, and we're going to take a break from our Belgian episodes to come to you from Santa Cruz, California. Joining me for this episode of the podcast are Nick Pavlina, co-founder and brewmaster for Humble Sea. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast, Nick.
Yeah, thank you.
And Nate Chesser, director of brewing ops for Humble Sea. Welcome to the podcast, Nate.
Thank you.
I am on my way down to Firestone Walker later this weekend for the Invitational Festival, one of my favorites of the year. I know you guys are pouring there too, and figured, hey, we'll come stop through Santa Cruz, grab this podcast that we've been talking about for a couple of years. Of course, Nick was on our West Coast Pilsner panel a couple of years ago with Sam Tierney and I think it was Bob Coons, right?
Yep.
So, but we didn't get the full Humble Sea story. And of course, you guys brew more than just West Coast Pilsner. Of course, you've got a big focus on lager. You've got a big focus on IPA. Both of those things figure heavily into the Humble Sea story. And of course, Humble Sea has been growing pretty rapidly from this home base here in Santa Cruz, and now have multiple locations all through this Bay Area, coastal area, and in the city of San Francisco and East Bay, or San Francisco, I guess, is coming in East Bay.
Coming soon.
Coming soon, exactly. And so, the Humble Sea story is growing and hitting more people, and of course, on the strength of fantastically made beer. We should mention you won a silver medal in 2022 for Humble Sea Helles at the World Beer Cup. No small feat. Obviously, seeing some notoriety and some respect from brewing peers judging that competition for the lagers that you make. We're going to dive into that approach to lager. We're going to dive into that approach to IPA. But before we do, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer. But don't just take it from me.
Hey, this is Josh Erickson of Jafuncta Brewing in Mandeville, Louisiana. The team at G&D were a critical part of our 10X expansion, always just a phone call or email away. And thanks to their superior equipment, technology, and documentation, commissioning our new chiller was smooth and straightforward. Now we can't wait until we need to upgrade our existing chiller.
That's right. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your new G&D chiller. And ProBrew is the industry partner the brewers trust to take their operations to the next level, especially when it comes to canning their product for distribution. By partnering with ProBrew, brewers can fill and seam their canned product. It ranges from 100 to 600 cans per minute. Their unique filling process also ensures low dissolved oxygen pickup and focuses on product quality during the entire process. For more information, visit probrew.com or email them at contactus@probrew.com. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, are you struggling to source affordable citrus ingredients due to market fluctuations? Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends, which mimic straight concentrates, but at a better price point and with a more reliable supply. Old Orchard's citrus-flavored blends include blood orange, grapefruit, lemonade, lime, and tangerine. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Nick, we normally start off the podcast with a little bit of history and background. Tell me the Humble Sea story.
Yeah, it's kind of a long one, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. I think it's pretty interesting. So I got into beer in college. I went to Chico State in the beautiful Northern California town of Chico, home to a cute
That's where the yeast comes from, right?
Yeah, that's where the yeast comes from. A cute little brew pub by the name of Sierra Nevada. So I think I've heard of them before. Yeah, I was lucky to experience a lot of their kind of small batch stuff that you could only get on draft in Chico. The beer that stood out to me at the time was their Blonde Ale, which I don't think they make anymore. But it was just this, Blonde Ale. But it was this, hoppy, Cascade-driven kind of West Coast Blonde Ale. And I just never had a beer like that before. So when I moved home in 2008, I started homebrewing with my dad, who actually homebrewed in Chico in the 70s. And started a homebrew club and likes to think Ken Grossman was a part of it, but who knows? So I immediately was
revisionist history.
Yeah, exactly. Immediately became obsessed.
I mean, the 70s, Chico, I imagine memories a little foggy of those days.
Yeah, I don't know if his stories are, but yeah, became obsessed, surpassed his knowledge pretty quickly, and knew that this was something that I wanted to kind of do a little bit more seriously. So went through the American Brewers Guild in 2012. So got kind of a formal beer education. Shortly after that, a good friend approached me, Allie, about starting a brewery with her, but unfortunately, shortly after planning, she passed away. So the brewery kind of got put on the back burner. Fast forward a couple years, I got married in 2014, brewed all the beer for the wedding, and had several people come up to me at the wedding, saying, "Hey, if you don't open a brewery, we'll be mad at you because your beer is a lot better than the beer out there right now." So I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll give it a shot again. But I knew I wanted to focus just on the beer and the production of the beer. I didn't have any experience in the bar or kind of branding, marketing realm. So reached out to a couple friends that that were good friends with my brother growing up. Taylor, one of my partners, had a good experience in the bar and restaurant industry. And Frank, he just moved back into town from South America. Good branding and digital design background. And so asked them to join me, and luckily they said yes. The next year we started the corporation, and at that time I was living at my grandmother-in-law's house up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and we didn't know that the property was zoned for a home occupation, like a horse stable winery. So we actually got our ABC license and quickly upgraded my homebrew setup.
Professional homebrew setup.
A professional homebrew setup. So we upgraded my homebrew setup to a 1-barrel system, and started slanging 250-liter kegs of beer per week out of grandma's house.
Were we just filling up growlers or something?
I mean, we just had a couple accounts in Santa Cruz that we'd sell kegs to, and found our spot on Swift Street on the west side of Santa Cruz, and still was brewing at grandma's. We brewed 200 barrels of beer on that 1-barrel system in a year.
Jeez.
So a lot of trial and error.
That's a lot of homebrew.
Mostly error, but we learned a lot, and opened up our Swift Street tap room in 2017. And we just had our 7-year anniversary, and we're cruising.
Cool. So, even in 2015 when you launched the brewery, like there's a lot of breweries in this. California in the state of California, huge population. Obviously, also has a lot of breweries. It's actually not in terms of per capita terribly saturated, just because there are so many people in this state, but there are a lot of great breweries around here. There's a lot of great breweries in the Bay Area. Obviously, you've got some great breweries down here in the Central Coast, all the way down to LA and San Diego, of course. Just some phenomenal breweries throughout here.
Absolutely.
What got you thinking? Like, how did you start thinking about what Humble C was going to be known for, and how you were going to stand out and be different, and what was going to be the signature for the beers that you make?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in my final kind of homebrew years, at the time, pretty much all I was making was German lagers and English pale ales, which are coming back.
Lagers are. It'll be a couple more years for those.
A few more years for the English pale ales.
We'll get there.
We do. Yeah, we have like that cask issue every couple of years for the magazine. Like eventually, we're going to get the timing right.
Yep.
Eventually. Of course, our third issue ever of the magazine in 2014 was also the lager issue. So we were still ahead on that one. But again, we kept doing it, and eventually, you just manifest these things.
Exactly.
Like we just start visualizing and believing in them, right?
Yeah. So, out of grandma's house, all I was brewing was, German lagers, and my two partners were like, "Hey dude, why are you making these 6-week beers that nobody wants?" And I'm like, well,
on a 1-barrel system.
Yeah, on a 1-barrel system. I'm like, well, that's because that's what I like to drink. And they're like, cool.
We also need to sell them cheaper than you might sell other beers because they're lagers,
exactly.
Right?
And they're like, well, do you want to go out of business, or, people want IPAs, so let's make IPAs. So I was like, all right, well, and they're like, make a hazy IPA. And I was like, well, what the hell's a hazy IPA? So I took my trusty, Pliny homebrew clone that I've tweaked over the years, added a bunch of oat flakes and wheat and a shitload of Citra. And that was kind of how our core foggy IPA, Socks and Sandals, was born.
Hazy IPA born of Pliny the Elder clone.
Who would have thought?
Shout out to Vinny.
So we just...
Maybe a little different yeast choice, too.
Different yeast choice. And so we just iterated hazy IPAs a shitload at grandma's, and that's kind of what kicked us off and how we became known.
Well, making 1-barrel batches of it means you had to brew it all the time.
Exactly.
And that's, especially if you're pioneering or like working on developing something new like that. Even though brewing 1-barrel batches is commercial suicide, it's also a great discipline to, test things, learn from them, and very quickly in the following week or days, implement those in the next batch.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, we knew that it was just a short period of time because we were building out our 10-barrel Swift Street location. So But yeah, it was tons of good trial and error batches. 200 barrels in that grandma's carport. It's pretty hardcore.
Yikes. Well, let's I want to talk a little bit about your approach to lager brewing, especially, within the proper brewery, as you got into it. Well, as you got into the larger scale brew system and started focusing and, have definitely implemented things like decoction to help make the lagers exactly the way that you want to make them. There's an intentionality behind it that's very purposeful in the way that you're set up to do that. And then, of course, we'll go back and talk about some of those hazy IPAs, but we've got to leave those to the end just to make sure people keep listening.
Yep.
Although, I don't know, maybe we should leave lager. I don't know these days. I really don't know what our audience wants. May be different than what the general beer audience wants, since our audience is brewers. Nonetheless, we'll talk about lagers first, and then we'll talk about hazy IPA. Before we do that, experience distinct transparency and juiciness with Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5. Using their Lumina technology, Omega genetically eliminated haze in the popular British 5 strain, allowing you to preserve the fruit-boosting prowess while achieving crystal clarity. Perfect for modern West Coast IPAs. Learn more at info@omegayeast.com. Also, RSS Macklin, a family-owned company started by the head of seaming technology from PS Angeles and SME and field service technician for Ball Corp, offers audits and repairs for can seamers and can integrity training. With experience from big breweries, they bring valuable knowledge to craft businesses. They provide solutions for can damage, seam training, and they will help your facility become self-sufficient without relying on original equipment manufacturers. If you have any questions regarding your machine setup, parameters, or concerns about your can line, call them at 330-299-8210 or email them at service@rssmacklin.com. And if you're a brewery or distillery in planning or interested in adding a brewery or distillery to your existing craft beverage business, visit breweryworkshop.com now. Secure your spot in our upcoming brewery and distillery workshop this September in Fort Collins, Colorado. Opening or purchasing a brewery or distillery today is rife with challenges, and the things you don't know that you don't know could be the difference between failure and success. Invest in the success of your business with this 4-day intensive filled with panels, discussions, small group sessions, technical tours, and more. Learn more at breweryworkshop.com. All right, Nick. So now you have a 10-barrel brew house, and you can make lagers, and you can fit lagers into the overall plan alongside your hazy IPAs. Talk to me about how you envision the program that you're going to make, and what some of those core lagers became, where you found inspiration for those, and how you decided to stake out your own kind of creative territory within the broad idea or family of quote unquote lager.
Yeah, there's a lot there. We finally, after maybe a year of being open, kind of had the, budget, I guess, for lagers, because it's hard to open your doors with a lager program. So we invested in our infrastructure. My brewing technicality, I just nerd out on the most difficult things you can do to brew, like decoction mashing, just to get any sort of nuance. And tasting a well-made lager is pretty spectacular. And when I was homebrewing, there wasn't a lot of good craft lagers out there, so it inspired me even more to just dig into the procedures and everything. So a year or two after we opened, we tweaked our brew house to do decoction mashing, and got a bunch of horizontal lagering tanks, and really just started to dig into all things lager brewing.
You say tweaked the brew house.
Yeah, we added a kettle agitator to the kettle, and kind of a wort way to and from our mash lauter with a big flexible impeller pump, so we can go forward and reverse from both vessels to do kind of traditional decoction mashing, and added a whirlpool. So we kind of increased our capacity and gave us the ability to brew the lagers that we wanted to brew
all at the same time.
Yeah, why not?
I like that CapEx argument. Well, we're increasing our ability to make more beer.
That's what I pitched my partners on. Yeah, we definitely need to add this kettle agitator to brew more beer.
Oh yeah.
So
increased our capacity by 30%
there. And I've just always preferred German lagers over Czech lagers. I love Czech lagers. We just had our Czech Pils that we were just drinking. But to me, I just always loved working with lager strains, and I just prefer the flavor and profile from them. So our focus has kind of always been on German lagers
or European lagers.
Yeah, not necessarily American, but
well, then when it comes down to something like Helles, for example, or Pilsner, German style Pilsner or Czech Pilsner, where does your creative process start? Where do you all start thinking about when you start developing a recipe and start building an identity for it? Where's the creative process start?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of it comes from our peers. There's a lot of world-class German lager breweries in the U.S., Bierstadt. We've taken a lot of inspiration from Ashley and what she's done, and have become, good friends with her and made beer with her and have learned a lot from her. And just seeing what others are doing that we think make world-class beer.
You guys have Trumer here in the Bay Area. Of course, there's Enegren.
Enegren's making world-class lagers and German lager specifically. So I think pale lager in general just has always fascinated me, and it's what I prefer to drink, and specifically Pilsner, just the balance between the malt and the hops. And I have 3 daughters, and I've named a lot of our core Pilsners after my daughters. So Penelope Pilsners are German Pils, Paisley Pilsners are Italian Pils, and my newest daughter's 5 months old, and Priya Pilsner is kind of a mix. We call it like a continental Pils, but it's sort of a German Pils.
The 3 Ps.
The 3 Ps, the Pilsners.
Yeah, I think a lot of our process, like Nick said, has come from our peers, not just for lagers, but for every beer that we make. We've done so many collaborations throughout the years where we've taken snippets of what many other breweries that, frankly, make really fantastic beer, sometimes, much better than us. We've taken ideas from each of them and kind of amalgamated that into a process that we think, hopefully makes great beer.
Well, what does that feel like, from on a practical level? Like, you guys start thinking about Helles, and obviously you brewed Helles for a few years before you won a World Beer Cup silver medal for it. How did that process start? And then how, talk to me about how you continued to develop that beer over years, and got it to a point where you were truly happy with it. What does that feel like? Yes, you learn some things from folks, but that end up with discussions between you all. How did that end up like reflecting itself in recipe changes, process changes, the small kinds of tweaks that that help develop these beers?
Yeah, I think that's just our production team. We are very active in providing feedback to each other and making small tweaks, and we have a lot of talented brewers on our team, so we can really just dive into every single point in the process and find out where we want to make the tweaks. And it's just a collaborative process with our team and making all those tweaks.
Yeah, I mean, specifically, I think we've gone through a number of different changes with that beer since we did win that award.
Since you won
since we've won the award,
wow,
yeah,
okay.
We've tried to recreate it a few times, but we've made minor tweaks here and there based on what people have said. Is it too bitter? Is it not bitter enough? Just trying to nail that that perfectly. We've had to deal with from year to year differences in alpha acids and the hops that we're able to acquire, and haven't quite been able to recapture that award yet, but we're working on it.
Well, winning a World Beer Cup medal in a category like Helles or Pilsner is, it's no small feat.
Definitely not.
And it's something most brewers hope to do once in their lifetime and not continue to repeat. But having said that, it's great to want to follow up on that. What have been some of those things? Obviously, you're right. If you're, the alpha acids of hops in 2022 were, a complete mess, and that necessitated some challenges. But have there been other things in terms of, whether that's base malt or whether that's, even how hops are used in that Helles that might have changed over that time?
Yeah. There's been so many pinpoints that we've looked at, anything from how we acidify the mash, the times of each of our mash rests, tweaking the saccharification temperatures, tweaking the decoction boiling times, tweaking the oxygen rates, tweaking the fermentation temperatures. We've tweaked everything.
Sure.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you found truly worked for you, in some of those tweaks that, that may have been unexpected or that may have, started to kind of get it where you wanted it to be?
That's an incredible question. I don't think it's ever exactly where we want it to be, but
no, not quite yet.
I think
perfection is a moving target.
Yeah, exactly. I think some of the tweaks that I've recognized that have kind of worked are the different saccharification rests that we do during the mash. For a while, our Helles was just coming out way too dry, so we lowered the temperature of our first sac rest and increased the time of our second. That kind of helped retain some body in the beer.
Yeah, the base.
I love it that the Helles is not a crispy beer in that sense, that it has to have that kind of body.
It's got to have backbone
to it,
for sure. Yeah, we honestly haven't changed the base malt much at all. Most of the changes that we have done, I feel like, have been on the cold side. We've it's always been a kind of a 6 to 8 week beer, but we've played around back and forth with, based on feedback and notes from our peers, like Nick said, we played around with a colder fermentation temp and not doing a diacetyl rest, or doing, almost no diacetyl rest, which I was very nervous about the first few times that we did it.
Sure.
But if you've got happy, healthy yeast, then, if many times you don't really need to do a diacetyl rest.
You guys are going to make Chris Loring happy with that.
Right?
No de-rests.
But I feel like because of those changes, we've been able to make a super, crisp beer, but like you said, with a nice backbone to it, and with very little fermentation characteristics to it, so we can let that kind of pure malt flavor kind of shine through.
What base malt do you guys?
It's almost 100% Weyermann Barke Pils.
Barke Pils.
Yep. Which is a pretty intense malt. I think playing with it over the years, we've noticed that it has a very distinct character to it that really shows through. We happen to like it. I know some people who don't really like it, but we definitely happen to like it very much.
How do you describe it? What kind of flavor does it kind of capture for you?
What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, it kind of has this kind of heavy, bready sweetness that works very well in Helles,
sure.
At least for us. We were using it in our German Pils, but we found it didn't work very well in our German Pils.
It was just too much.
It was too much malt flavor. So our German Pils is kind of leaned out, and been playing around with different Pilsner malts for that, but it works very well in Helles for us, at least.
Interesting. So, and then what do you like? What is Pilsner then use for base malt?
Currently, we just use the normal Weyermann Pils.
Yep.
Honestly, we've been through so many different things. One of the things about us is we're constantly trying to evolve, and constantly trying to figure out what the next thing is. Sometimes maybe to our detriment, but I would argue it's it's a good way to exist, to be constantly learning and trying out new ingredients, because I feel like we're always looking for that best thing,
Well, like I joked with Nick before we started this, the fact that all of these things are constantly changing for everyone is good job security for me, because we constantly have things to talk about, because all of these things are always changing. Now, you mentioned that it's almost all Weyermann Barke Pils, so there's something else in there to help build that kind of body and character.
I think it's just a little bit of Barke Vienna, right?
Yep.
Just for color, or
just a little bit of malt complexity, a little oomph, if you will.
A little zhuzh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we wanted to really, trim down kind of base so we could really try to capture the flavor that we feel like we're getting from the decoction process. If you're going to do it twice, go through the trouble and all the time and effort of doing a decoction, I feel like you got to keep the malt trimmed back a little bit so you can kind of let that process do its work.
Sure. So double decoction process on the Helles.
Yeah. Yep.
Tell me about that. Obviously you've worked on it. I imagine you've tested these variables just to make sure that it's worth all the effort and trouble to do that for you.
Yes and no. We're just believers.
Just believers.
There's
just blind faith in decoction.
If you really dig into it, like the amount of enzyme ranges that you hit and all the chemistry behind it, the quality and the quantity of extract that you get from decoction is just kind of unmatched, not to mention the, Maillard reactions you get. And we're just traditionalists when it comes to lager brewing.
Quality and quantity of extract. Tell me about that.
Just the enzymatic ranges you hit, boiling the thick part of the mash, degrades it. You're leaving the majority of the enzymes back in the thin part of the mash, exposing more of the thick part, pushing it back into the thin part, hitting that next enzyme range. You're just, not to mention during the decoction, you're slowly raising it, hitting all these enzyme ranges. The amount of enzymes you hit are just way more than just a single infusion mash. And to me, it's worth the extra work just for any small nuance that you get from the extract.
Yeah, I always tell people that decoction is like 1 part science, 9 parts faith. There's something about that smell in the air when you're boiling that mash that is just really addicting. But I can tell you, we actually do get better brewhouse efficiency every time we decoct. We get the best brewhouse efficiency. I don't know if that's just a time thing or not, but it definitely gives us great extract from the brewhouse.
That's really interesting. And, while at the same time, you're hitting that efficiency without just over drying the beer out either, keeping those things
exactly
in this kind of balance that you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think that there's an intangible to it that is beyond kind of the final gravity or the extract that you get. Sometimes, some of those beers, even if we decoct them, they can finish in the low 2s or so, or sometimes even in the high 1s sometimes, and they still have body to them despite having an apparent extract that is objectively low.
Yeah, I think the boiling, the decoction, you dissolve these kind of proteins and they aid in, they don't, instead of clouding the beer, they kind of enhance the body and the head, and I think that goes a long way.
What's your Helles decoction protocol look like?
So we dough in for a quick protein rest at about 130 degrees, and immediately when dough in's done, we ramp up with steam to the first sack rest about 148, and after that we pull a third to boil for the decoction for about 20 minutes, return it to the second sack rest at about 160, and leave it there for about 20 minutes, and then we pull a third, boil for another 20 minutes, push it back for mash out, and boil off.
So that's relatively quick, not as quick as some, but also seems like that's a little bit faster, that you're able to get up to that kind of temperature relatively quickly.
No, it takes a while. Okay. It definitely takes a while.
Okay. So then it extends like to those mash steps in the meantime end up kind of hanging out for a little while.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, and that may be why, like you said, that may be why we get such great efficiency on those batches specifically.
Not just from the decoction, but from the extended step mashing regimen
that's right.
that also goes along with that decoction. The hidden benefit.
That's right.
of that decoction.
That's how we sell it to the the owners as well. We get better efficiency, so we spend more time doing this process because we get an extra 5% out of the malt.
But look at that, right? You're using so much less malt that way. I mean,
That's
over
right.
time you are. Yeah. Well, let's move from the mash and talk about the kind of hot side boil process and that.
Sure.
Anything to it, like in terms of Helles? How do you hop that, and and then in broader things, talking about your German or Czech style pilsners, are there some kind of hops and general regimens that you all adhere to on those?
Yeah, I mean the Helles is pretty much 100%. Well, it's not pretty much. It is 100% middle through. We do a good size first wort charge and then a small kind of 15-minute pilsner. I mean, we make a bunch of different kinds of pilsners, but we usually always do a first wort hop. I don't really have any technical reasoning behind that. Besides, that's just what's always worked for us.
Traditional, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, pilsner we usually kind of a first wort 90-minute charge, and then
that's usually Pearl, right?
Yeah, Pearl is our German pils, and then a kind of a 45-minute middle through, and then another 15-20-minute middle through.
You can tell we're big fans of middle through.
I'm getting the sense you guys are Team Hallertau and not Team Tettnang, huh?
But yeah, I don't think any of our lagers get less than like a 15-minute addition. I think when you add kind of noble hops late in the boil, especially Whirlpool, it gets pretty grassy and yucky. I think they just need a little bit of time in the kettle.
Well, and when they're lagers are stripped back so much too, even those 15-minute additions really shine through in terms of flavor and aroma.
Cool. Well, let's talk about fermentation then. But before we do that, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties, that's Strata, Lorien, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia, to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroir, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling. Thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. Also, Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavor. Fresh strains keep diacetyl low, even with large hop additions. Tropics strains make a tropical bouquet reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops. And they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping. Mention this podcast for 20% off of your first order. And if you're a brewer who's also interested in distilling, subscribe now to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast, available on all of your favorite podcast platforms, hosted by Sydney Jones, lead supervisor and technical lead for Heaven Hill in Bardstown, Kentucky, and Molly Troop, master distiller for Freeland Spirits in Portland, Oregon. This podcast explores the technical and creative processes behind great spirits through conversations with some of the leading distillers working today. It's everything you love about the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast, but focused on distilling. Click on the link in the show notes and give it a listen. Right. Let's talk about lager fermentation. You guys change up the yeast a little bit depending on what you're brewing, but I imagine your German-style lagers all have a consistent yeast approach. Tell me about your approach to fermentation in lagers, German lagers.
Yeah, we use a BSI German Lager 4. It's like a Southern German lager strain. It's a little different. I don't really actually know anybody else that uses it.
That's why you originally wanted to use it, though, right?
Yeah, that's what I like to use as a home brewer because it was kind of different.
Huh. Different in what way?
It works really well with kind of malt-driven lagers. It also works in pilsners, but I think that's why it works so well in Helles. But I just wanted something that was a little different than what everybody else was using. But yeah, we usually cool in around 44 to 46, ferment at 48. We usually spun the tank at the tail end of fermentation, slowly drop the temperature.
It's pretty cold fermentation, like you were talking about.
It's pretty cold, and try to shoot for 100% natural carbonation. We usually get there, drop it down to 40, kind of hold it there, past VDK, and it's transferred to the lager tanks. It's conditioned there for another 4 weeks, and we kind of shoot for like a 6-week beer, depending on the style, the gravity, and at the original location, we send it through the centrifuge. At our production facility, we have a filter that we use, and that's.
So tell me about the character of this yeast. Obviously, the mainline 3470 and Augustiner yeast. There's people understand. They've got their own characters, and obviously people develop preferences around that. With this, yeast that's maybe not as commonly used, understanding you've got to build your own knowledge around it. What is it about this yeast that produces the character that is exciting to you?
I think we like it for a number of reasons. It is a very low diacetyl former, so it produces very little diacetyl, so we can do that cold fermentation without worrying too much about diacetyl. I would say it's probably low to medium sulfur. We get a little bit of sulfur from fermentation that usually blows off by the time, in that extended maturation process. And it's also very low acid aldehyde. So, the things we like about it is it doesn't produce a lot of the stuff that we're not looking for in the lagers. I think it produces just the right amount of sulfur because we do actually like just a tiny bit of sulfur in our lagers.
Sure.
So I think it's mostly because it works really well with our process. Like Nick said, it does kind of accentuate the malty characteristics of a beer. I think it brings out the best in the Barquet Pilsner that we use for the Helles. We've been experimenting a little bit with other yeasts for more hop forward lagers because, like I said, it does tend to kind of favor the malt in those beers.
Tell me about that. Obviously we drank a Czech lager, Czech style lager before we started the podcast, and it's left this beautiful lacing on the glass that I just love to watch. But you did mention that you use Czech yeast for that, and obviously your goal in that is to highlight the hop character in that Czech style Pilsner. Yeah,
so that is I think it's the Czech Lager 2. It's the one that again is less diacetyl. I know me personally, like I cannot stand
less diacetyl in your Czech
less
lager?
diacetyl in Czech lager. I went to Prague a few years ago and did a whole circuit, Prague and Pilsen, a whole circuit of Czech lagers, and only found a couple that I liked that had a very small amounts of diacetyl in them. I know that's part of the style in some cases, but I personally just can't stand diacetyl. So this yeast, the Czech
Such
lager,
an American.
yeah, right. This I can't stand it. I can't stand like buttery Chardonnays either. So it's probably the same, kind of sensitivity to it as that. But this Czech Lager 2 yeast is great because it's way less of that diacetyl. I think it's super hop forward. I love a Czech lager that is real bitter and is just like a punch of saws to the face. So I think that's, at least partially what we were going for here. Again, this is another recipe that we're still continuing to iterate on, especially because it does use a different house, a different lager yeast than the one we usually have in house. We're usually working with 3 to 4 different yeast strains at the same time. So it makes my job more complicated when we got to bring in an extra yeast strain, but it's well worth it in this case.
Sure. Are there any other, beers that you've been playing with over the last year in the lager space that have, provided some interesting learning for you all? Obviously you enjoy those experimentations.
I think West Coast Pilsner, I prefer 3470 in. I think I know a lot of brewers that use that as
just because it goes so neutral and lets the hops push forward.
Yeah, I know a lot of brewers that use it as their kind of house West Coast IPA strain. So, in the West Coast Pilsners that we've made, we've made them with our house German lager strain, which I think works well. But usually when we make West Coast Pils, we'll bring in 3470 for it.
Yeah, I can say we've done a lot of collaboration lagers in the past too. Just recently, we for our anniversary party a couple months ago, we did collaborations with Gold Dot and Wayfinder, both making fantastic lagers. But we often use collaborations as an opportunity to experiment with either new yeasts or new malts. Nick, do you remember which brewery it was that we did a collaboration with where we used the new Weyermann Isseria malt?
Yeah, that was Bierstadt.
That was with Bierstadt? That's right. Yeah. We definitely have this like kind of experimental kick where we really like to use those opportunities to test out new ingredients like that, because in so many cases lager is so driven by these kind of heritage malts, especially if you're trying to recreate a traditional style. It's a cool way to really taste the unique flavors that are offered by these malt houses who are creating these heritage malt profiles.
Sure. What'd you learn about that Isseria?
I remember it being kind of weird. I remember it was really expensive, but that's Weyermann now. I remember it being
is that the Italian grown?
No, that's the Ericlea. That's Ericlea, which
okay.
we've also used that one in one of Nick's daughter beers in Paisley, the Italian Pilsner. We like to use that one.
Sure.
So there's very much like a connection for us between, if we're trying to create a style that is supposed to emulate, a historic or traditional or heritage style, we will pay the extra expense or go through the extra labor to use the malt, or at least one that's available that they, might have been using or similar to what they might be using in that area. Because we think that's an important way to pay homage to those kind of styles.
That seems like a collab where there's only one beer to do that.
That's right.
It doesn't need to become a standing kind of thing for you.
I'm not about to make a flagship out of that.
You can take the risks and you can stomach the expense all on that too. Well, let's, before we let this entire episode go to lager, let's shift gears and talk about foggy IPA. And I love that you define it in that kind of semantic term of foggy, given that here on the Pacific Coast in Santa Cruz, there is definitely a marine layer of fog most days.
Except for today.
Well, there was some this morning. I drove down from San Francisco on US 1
nice.
Along the coast. Beautiful drive down, much better than the interstates further inland. And got to see some of that marine layer in action. But and it's such a funny thing that even using that kind of linguistic description for it makes it feel more germane, more local, more connected to the environment that you're in. But let's talk about that for a little bit. You mentioned, Nick, that it started with a Pliny the Elder clone that you added a bunch of oats to, and then obviously changed up some yeast around. And that became Socks and Sandals, which is, this kind of core hazy IPA that you make. Where did it start, and what does it feel like now? How has that evolved over that kind of time?
Oh man, you sure you don't want to finish the episode with English cask beer? Next one. We're
going to go full into this haze malaise. Okay. We're just going to talk about hazy IPA.
Yeah, I mean,
you got to give brewers what they don't want.
That's right. That's
right.
right.
Exactly. So the question was, how has it evolved, or what?
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Because it sounds like in an interesting way that you're trying to meld some West Coast IPA traditions with this hazy IPA idea and come up with some identity for this. Had a great conversation with Connor and Tim from Cellar Maker about the same kind of thing a few years ago. They love describing their West Coast hazy IPAs and do believe that it has a different kind of, feel and approach. I think Monkish also has that kind of higher bitterness in California informed idea of what hazy IPA can be. And it creates a different way into the same kind of broader family that creates this character that's very much theirs. And I love finding these kinds of pockets of identity within this broader style that some people seem to think is just this monolithic, characterless, all fruit, all citra, mosaic, everything. And so clearly that's not your approach to hazy IPA. Clearly you are trying to find, some sort of hybrid character in there.
Yeah. When we first started making them, we called them bi-coastal IPAs, but nobody knew what the hell that meant.
Nope.
So we stuck with the foggy IPA. But yeah, they were kind of this mix between this, C hop kind of old school West Coast IPA approach, but softening it up a little bit, and that became kind of our identity. And I think one of the biggest contributing factors to make a brewery unique is their water profile. A lot of people think that we use RO water since we have, such a sophisticated lager program, but we don't. We just carbon filter our water and tweak the brewing salts. So I think our brewing water has made our foggy IPAs kind of unique and stand out. A lot of people that I talk to are like, oh, I can tell it's a humble sea because I can taste the water. Like, I don't really know what they mean by that, just because I'm used to brewing with this water. But I think that's one of the biggest contributing factors that sets us apart.
What is your water like here?
It's pretty moderate. It's not super soft. It's not super hard. It works in a lot of different styles. It's actually been a little softer the last year or two.
Yeah, it does fluctuate a little bit. I want to say off the top of my head, I think it's typically about 80 ppm of sulfate and maybe 20 to 40 chloride.
Yeah, but it's been almost like half that lately.
Yeah.
But yeah, we try to test our water like weekly. A lot of our recipes are based upon ratios, not exact amounts.
Right.
So we always want to know exactly what our water looks like. Lagers specifically, we kind of prefer the lower, ions, but hazy IPAs, we kind of target a certain ratio. Sometimes we target a certain chloride amount. West Coast IPA is kind of like a little bit different, set in stone kind of parameters that we deal with, not necessarily ratios, but I don't know where I'm going with this.
No, yeah, it's all right. He keeps trying to get you back to lagers.
Yeah.
Like you said, we use a good amount of chloride in our hazy or foggy IPAs. Typically a ratio, anywhere from 2 to 2.5, 2.75 even in some cases of chloride to sulfate, to the point where when we're doing taste panels, some of the descriptors that start to come out is a little salty, that we feel like actually accentuates some of the fruit character in those beers. It's like putting just a little pinch of salt on a piece of fruit or something that can really bring out some of the fruity flavors, if you've ever tried that.
Let's talk about hops in these. Yeah. And I think that, because we don't have a ton of time to talk about this, I'm just really curious about how, what your, not just your core, but also some of these extensions of it start to look like. Again, coming from this West Coast IPA idea of, if you're talking about Pliny, then, it's a lot about Simcoe and Mosaic.
Right.
What do hops feel like, in socks and sandals, and how do you extend out from that while also maintaining this kind of West Coast hazy idea to it?
Yeah, it's a big, broad question. Hop sourcing is one of my favorite parts about being in the brewing industry. Traveling to Yakima for harvest, going to New Zealand and Australia last year for harvest. Citra is by far our biggest usage hop, probably followed by Simcoe. Foggy IPA, sorry. We have a pretty similar approach on, kind of cool pooling, only the hops. There's been a lot of good research from, YCH with survivables, and we're very strategic about, which varieties go where and when. But over the years, we've tried just about every single hop you can think of in various stages, and we've kind of honed into some of our favorites that work best for us. And
what are some of those favorites that work best for you?
Citra, obviously.
Sure, of course.
But there's
hot take there.
Yeah, I know. Who would have thought? There's a handful of New Zealand. Nectron, has blown up over the last couple of years, and that's always worked very well for us in both Foggy and West Coast.
Sure.
Yeah, we got really excited about Nectaron a few years ago when it first came out on the scene, and I'm pretty sure we bought probably 10% of the entire world market of it.
We did, yeah. We overdid it, but we've used it.
Yeah, we fell in love with it after that. That's for sure.
And then I think Simcoe and Centennial kind of are some of my favorites. that we use a lot of.
Yeah. Simcoe, huh?
Simcoe, yeah.
Even in hazy IPA.
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, it all depends on what you select. You know, we select pretty much every hop we use. So we're very strategic about which, attributes we want. The Simcoe that we usually pick is pretty kind of pineapple forward, not on the super dank kind of old school Simcoe side. So it works super well in hazy. We've gone a little bit more towards the old school dank Simcoe in the recent selections, but
why?
I just like it, and West Coast IPAs had this great resurgence lately, and I think our West Coast IPAs are right there with our foggy IPAs.
Do you select the same Simcoe for your hazy IPAs and your West Coast IPAs, or do you change the selection up?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've talked about changing it, but we've kind of settled in this middle ground of being able to use it for both. So we just usually select one lot.
It's a great idea. We might have to do that this year.
Yeah, we've talked about it, but haven't done it yet.
Not to add any more complexity to an already complex thing. What's fermentation look like? You mentioned, obviously that you're not going to get a truly hazy IPA without a yeast that's going to, stay hazy, and your typical Chico yeast is not going to, give you the kind of lasting haze that you're looking for. So where'd you end up on that, and what have you found that complements your approach with hops?
Yeah, we use a London 3 strain.
Sure.
And ferment at 67 degrees. We usually dry hop.
Still a little cool there too.
Yeah, a little bit. Keep the esters.
There's a common theme here.
Keep the esters under control a little bit. Usually dry hop. We do traditional like dual stage double dry hop. So we usually dry hop the first one at the tail end of fermentation, cap the tank, spun it. Second dry hop under pressure. So even our IPAs are, pretty naturally carbonated. They're into the bright tank at 2.3 volumes, and we kind of top them off. But that's kind of the fermentation approach.
Yeah, I remember we started years ago with a Conan strain for a while that always just ended up dropping clear after a certain amount of time, and they started experimenting with some London 3 strains, and now we centrifuge every single one of our beers, even foggy IPAs, and it won't drop clear with London 3, which is great.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, let's pull back and look at like a big picture. And Nick, I think this question's for you. You've been doing this for a number of years. You started off in brewing lots and lots of batches on a 1-barrel system at your grandmother-in-law's house. You've got you built the location here in Santa Cruz. You've built now multiple locations around this kind of broader Bay Area, Santa Cruz to up to Alameda, San Francisco, along the coast, up in the mountains, et cetera, et cetera. Humble Sea has been growing and growing. What do you hope to achieve? What do you see, Humble Sea in 5 years? What does success look like for you? And how will you know when you've achieved it?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I think, keeping it fun, what does fun mean? Being able to experiment, being able to brew lager beer, the beer we like to brew, being able to focus on quality. I don't think we're going to grow. I don't want to be a huge brewery. I think we'll always stay pretty small. We don't really have any plans to go expand outside of kind of the Bay Area. We want to kind of focus on quality and keeping it controlled and kind of see where the craft beer world takes us, because it's, as we know, it's been changing a lot lately.
It has been changing a lot. How has that affected you all?
It hasn't affected us too much.
Here you are still growing.
Exactly. I think, a lot of breweries have popped up over the last several years, and some of them I don't think take quality as seriously as we do. So, you'll see that over the next few years, the ones that focus on quality are probably the ones that'll sustain it. So that's our plan.
Keep that quality up. Well, I think that's a great place to bring this to a close. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. Take your operations to the next level with the experts at ProBrew. Old Orchard is your go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast Daybreak 5 gives you juicy, modern hop flavors without the haze. RSS Macklin provides solutions for can damage, seam training, and packaging self-sufficiency without relying on OEMs. Brewers worldwide trust indie hops unite unique varieties Strata, Lorient, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Berkeley yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. And visit breweryworkshop.com now to get your tickets to our brewery and distillery workshop this September in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. Help support us in bringing you great brewing conversations every week through here, and of course, great issues of the magazines, Brewing Industry Guide and Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Nick and Nate, if people want to learn more about Humble C, the beers you brew, lager, foggy IPA, and everything else, even this classic pale ale that we also drank right here, an homage of sorts to that one beer that came from Chico. That's it's been so impactful. Where do they find you all?
Instagram's probably the best, or our website, humblec.com.
Or just come to beautiful Santa Cruz and have a beer with us.
Yep.
Sounds like a great plan. Well, thank you for sharing some beers with me, and thank you for sharing your brewing knowledge with all of our listeners out there. Cheers.
Cheers. Appreciate it.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.